And, you know, the last residential school closed in 1996 in BC. Now we're 16 years down the road. Why do you feel that it's difficult for people of your generation to even talk about it to this day?
I think that there's been a lot of focus on the people at residential schools, and there's been no focus on the people in the Indian day schools. The people at residential schools are, and I don't know this enough to say that they're getting funding to help them overcome these barriers to talk about it. We have nowhere to go. There's been no energy put into the people that went to Indian day schools. We're just like, you know, let's not talk about them, let's just talk about the residential school survivors. And I think there has to be a focus on those of us who went through Indian day school so that we can get help too, to have a dialogue, open up to say that this is important enough to have a look at and have these people getting some help somewhere.
And you're a parent. How do you convey this information to the next generation?
I think it's really difficult because we still haven't gotten to the point where we're openly talking about it. My kids will complain about school once in a while. I'll say, well, you know, yeah. I tell my kids about what I went through, and it's kind of hard because I don't really sometimes I feel anger and I feel hurt, and my kids want to know why, and I try to tell them about what it was like for me to grow up in Indian day school. They're able to learn Haida, they're singing and dancing, they're doing Haida artwork. And I always tell them that when I was growing up, when I was their age, if I even mentioned one word in Haida, that I get whipped pretty bad. And they're able to experience this, which I'm really happy about. But I also tell them that, you know, don't take any of this for granted, because there were a lot of people before the kids, like, you know, your dad went through hell and back to get to this point where we're getting people to talk about it, or I think a lot of people went through a lot to get the kids to the point where they're able to do that. So when I'm trying to explain it to them, I keep telling them a little bit at a time, not very much at one time, because it's abstract to them. And I'm really thankful that they'll never go through what I went through. And I keep telling them that, you know, you just be really grateful that you aren't going through what we went through when I was growing up.
So what did you lose as a result of going to Indian day school?
There were a lot. I think I lost that connection with my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. I lost I lost my whole culture for a while. And I think it's coming back slowly, and I've worked really hard at it through the Bill Reid stuff with the canoe, the repatriation of ancestral remains and artifacts back. We've been slowly repatriating wisdom and knowledge, all those kind of things that we lost when I was going through. And it's been a struggle. I think going through alcoholism and drug addiction was difficult. To come out of that was difficult. There was just a long time that I just felt like I didn't belong anywhere. So
One of the things some people might say is, and I'm wondering what you would say to someone who would say this, is that a lot of kids were spanked in school. You know, the strap wasn't outlawed in British Columbia until 1972, and they look at the situation with the Aboriginal people, and these are non-Aboriginal people, and they go, well, we also had a rough time in school. What would you say to someone who might have a thought like that in their head?
Well, there would be many things I would say. One of them is you weren't tortured, you were strapped. We were tortured. And they were trying to beat out of us our culture, our who we were as a people. They were getting strapped for breaking a rule in school. We were getting strapped for being Haida. We were getting whipped for talking our language, trying to maintain our culture, you know. I understand that other people went through some stuff, but the difference between what we went through and what they went through is we were getting beaten. We weren't getting punished. We were getting beaten and tortured.
And with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission coming to Vancouver in 2013, what are your thoughts about that and how that process is unfolding?
I've gone to UBC a couple times to listen to two different speakers about truth and reconciliation, and I think that they got to remember that there's other people in the First Nations who also went through a lot, who are being forgotten, and that's the Indian Day School people. And I hope that they will recognize that there's a lot of us out there that are still hurting really bad, who went through a lot, and we're, I guess we'll, until they recognize it and try and help us, that I guess we'll just carry this hurt, shame, and all those memories around for the rest of our lives.
What can the non-Aboriginal people do to help bring about reconciliation?
I think there's a lot of things they can do, and I've seen it at UBC a couple times, and that was a lady got up and she was really upset after she heard for the first time about residential schools, that none of this, she never heard any of this ever. And I think that as Canadians, people would want to understand what happened in why First Nations are the way they are. I think education on that is really important, and people standing up who aren't First Nations and saying, we want to know about this. We want to understand First Nations people. We want to know about their history, because there's no history of First Nations in the school systems. So there's a lot people can do that aren't First Nations, and I think that's a good starting point.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. I really appreciate you coming into the Georgia Strait and sharing your story.